So I'd like to welcome everybody back and also welcome Brae to join us as part of this panel discussion. So Kristin, the results you've shared highlight the importance of opportunities for career advancement. What do you think women should be doing to advance their own careers? And what should employers be doing to help women advance their careers?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I really struggle with the question, like, what more should women be doing? Because I feel like we are already doing so much. I hate to tell women to do more. Like, I feel like we're already so stretched, not only in managing our lives, but being told 100 different ways that we're doing things wrong, where we need to fit into more corporate business environments or change the way we work or ask for more opportunities or lean in. My advice to a woman who's earlier in their career is you look for things that interest you and ask for the opportunities that are most interesting to you. Because if you gravitate towards something, chances are that you like it and you're going to be good at it. And I've used that sort of as a guiding light in my own career. What I would say to employers is to create more opportunities for women. If you see someone who's not participating in a meeting or doesn't have a voice, create opportunities for them to speak. If you're a man working in an organization in a senior level position, find a woman to mentor. Men mentoring women and bringing them up in their careers is just as important as women mentoring other women. So I think there are lots of opportunities for men to be great advocates for the advancement of women in the workplace.
Hi, Sue. Ray here. I've got one piece of advice which is probably the piece of advice I've been giving most often for the last couple of years, which is don't choose your own judgment about whether you're good enough. If somebody says they want you to run this project, if they want you to speak on this panel, trust them. They've looked at your work, they've assessed it, and it's not exclusively women that ask me that question, but it is mostly say, I've been invited to go on this panel. Do you think I'm good enough? Trust the people who said you're good enough. Don't have that doubt yourself. I think this comes back to what Annie was saying.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I kind of suffer from the opposite problem, Ray. I always think I'm an expert on everything, so I should probably volunteer less. But yes, I think a lot of it is just taking the leap. And exactly what Annie said. She might have some additional words of wisdom here.
I am totally on the same page as you. I do spend so much time asking women to participate, to speak, and over, it takes multiple encouragements to convince somebody that, yes, your LinkedIn page shows you are an expert. I wouldn't be asking you otherwise. So just like you said, Ray, I wish people would listen to what people are telling them. If someone thinks you ought to speak, ought to write something, ought to lead something, it's because you ought to. So just say yes. Yes is a quick little word. Say yes to the first step. Don't worry about everything else that will follow. Just say yes to the first easy part, and that will get you started on the path.
Thanks. Annie, while we've got you on the line, your presentation really does sound like a good news story, but what do we need to happen next?
It's a good and bad news story. I can see both sides of the picture. We still do have a long way to go. I think for the most part, single gender panels are pretty much finished. At least in our industry, conferences do not like being called out for that, so they're making more efforts to make sure that does not happen. But there are still so many things that conference organizers, speakers, listeners can do. I think we really need to do a much better job of paying attention to our colleagues around us, the people around us. Notice who speaks well when called upon. If they speak well when called upon, they can probably speak well at the front of a conference, at a committee meeting or something like that. So take some time to talk to them, encourage them to take that next step. They're a good speaker in one spot, they're probably going to be a good speaker in another spot. And take some time to think about, are you in a position to step aside and pull others up to the same level you are at? So if you've already spoken at 4 or 5 conferences and you work with several other experts who've never spoken at a conference, maybe now's the time where you can play that mentor role. Encourage them to take a speaking spot and help them along the way. You've been there 4 or 5 times. You can make it easier for them with just a few little tidbits of advice.
Thanks, Annie. That is excellent advice. I've got some more questions that I'd like to ask, but if you're sitting in the audience, we will have time for questions from the audience. So please think about what you'd like to ask this panel with a wealth of experience and type your question into that question and answer box right now. So Kanika, you're one of the few people on the panel who's joining us from a slightly different part of the world. Do the comments that you've been hearing from Annie and Kristin, do they match your experience in India?
See, so I would say for a long time now, India's society has been quite paradoxical when it comes to roles of women. So, on one hand, women have had a huge role in the medicine practice, the teaching practice, even politics for that matter, but not so much in corporate. Because I think because of the work-life balance, or because they didn't have the adequate skill to be there. Also, other than that, I think what comes into play here is the family responsibility. So typically in an Asian society, especially in India, you have familiar commitments. So as a woman, we are expected to be responsible for the family much more than the man of the household. So these values are deeply entrenched in the system, and it's only now, in the recent years, that we do see a shift. Yes, the shift is happening, and in fact, there was a time when 8 major, I would say, private banks were being led by women. So, there has been a very systematic shift. But I think, so I would say it's so 3 factors come into play here. One is what we've discussed, what Annie discussed, what Kristin also discussed is the individual drive, right? So women got to have that self-belief that they can do it. Second is the organizational support. So as an organization, you have to make it possible for women. So especially here in Indian society, the support after maternity, let's say, is not that great. So you don't have, it's only, like I said, it's only in the recent years that you have good daycare options. Otherwise, it would be a norm that women would be expected to, discontinue their jobs either after getting married, or if not then definitely after having a baby. So you need to have that support from organizations as well, and family definitely comes into play. So unless your family is supporting you, you have supportive husband, you have supportive in-laws if you're staying with them, working or really shattering that glass ceiling, I would say, is not feasible.
Thanks very much, Kanika. Just a quick reminder, if you're on the panel, when you're not speaking, if you could mute yourself, that would be great. Just want to bring Andreas and Brae in at this point. As the 2 men on the panel, is there anything you'd like to add to the various women's perspectives on those last couple of questions?
Yes. Yeah, so I would say overall, I just find this, I'm enlightened actually, from the insights, and, these are perspectives that I honestly haven't even really considered. So I'm just kind of taking back and processing everything. And, I'd say, my team, I work with, Barbara Leflein, she's a leader. Within the research industry. And I've learned a lot from her, and I actually would say she's my mentor, as a matter of fact. So I would say the role is reversed a bit. So I'm in a position where I'm actually being mentored as a male by, women who are very accomplished, very intelligent, very insightful. And yeah, I think that's what I would say.
I'm just about ready to cry over here. This is that's one of the nicest things I've heard. Thank you so much, Andreas.
Yeah, no problem.
So, Brae here. I think that probably the other thing I would say to guys on the line is that you are going to find your own style of doing some of this. So when I'm invited to an all-male event, I don't normally make any noise about it. What I normally do is I talk to the organisers and say, hey, I can't speak on that. What can we do about it? And that has usually led to a change in the lineup. And if they do change the lineup, then I'm certainly not going to say, hey, they ended up only 25% female. Because actually when we started having the conversation, they were 0%, and they probably moved as far as they can in that one conference, and at the next conference they're going to be better. And I think with lots of these things, and this is a really big praise to Annie, it is a process. You know, Annie, lots of people complained before Annie started collecting the data, but change has been much faster since Annie collected the data. So collecting data is important. Understanding whether or not you're giving a fair opportunity to people is dependent on how many men and women, people of colour, people with disabilities get to speak. It's not about how many are invited. It's what are the outcomes. And I think that is why we need to, things like Annie's doing with that sort of measurement there.
Yeah,
Thanks, Ray.
this is Barbara. I just wanted to interject. I didn't hear it, Annie, in your talk, but there is a hashtag that I've used at conferences, which is, where are the women? Hashtag where are the women?
I've used the exact same one. and there's also a lot of hashtag manel.
Oh.
Yeah, so Gender Avenger is a website and a Twitter account. They do a lot of work tracking, paying attention to single gender panels, and for the most part it is male single gender panels. But that's there are lots of great ways to bring attention to the problem. Andreas pointed out his mentor, Barbara. So at this point, I have to point out mine. At one of my last jobs, Tessie Ting and Jean Davis were my bosses. These two women took no bull from anyone. They were powerful women who did what was right. None of this, there was no leaning in. It was simply, we're going to do this because this is the best thing to do. And I think I soaked in so much of their personality styles in terms of, they can do this, I can do this. And if I can do this, you can do this. So anytime I'm asking someone, you can speak at a conference, I'm channeling in Tessie and Jean as, of course you can do this. Let's do this. So thank you to them.
Super. Ray, we've got a question for you from the audience. So you have mentored both men and women in the market research industry. Do you have any advice for people who'd like to be in a mentorship role but not sure where to begin?
So if people want to be mentors or mentorees, I guess. So let's start. If you want to find somebody as a mentor, I would probably not aim too high in the sense of somebody who is only going to be occasionally in contact with you. I think you could say, yeah, I would love to have a conversation with somebody like Kristin. I'd love to have a conversation with somebody like Martin Sorrell. And you should. But you should also see if there is somebody who is closer above you, who's been through some of those steps more recently, and that might be a really good person. And then coming to this mentorship, you should almost immediately start looking for who are you going to give a hand up to. Because between mentoring and teaching, I spend a lot of my time doing that. And I think I learn more than I teach when I teach. I think I learn more when I mentor than the person I'm mentoring to, because it's a really valuable process. So yes, absolutely. Ask for some occasional slots. And if you're at a conference and you see somebody really impressive like Annie, making a presentation, say, Annie, could I have 15 minutes of your time and you can tell me what I should do next? But also look for somebody who is maybe 1 or 2 steps further down the road than you, and then look back and say, now, who can I help over the things that I have just done?
Thanks, Ray. I think that's really great advice.
So
Sorry,
just
Kristin.
to jump in really quick, if there are folks listening in that are, interested either in serving as a mentor or in trying to connect with a mentor, Wire actually runs a one-to-one mentoring program where we match over 100 women globally every year with mentors, either in their city or online if they live in a city where there isn't a mentoring opportunity. So we do all the matching in January of every year. The program's closed for this year, but if people are interested, they can visit our website to learn more.
Thanks, Kristin. That is great advice to everybody out there. So perhaps diarise that for next year. If you're in the audience and you'd like to ask a question, you've still got time to do so if you head to the Q&A box and type your question in. So I wouldn't mind steering the conversation back to some of the actual research that we talked about earlier in the session. And Barbara and Andreas, do you think there are any lessons from your work that we could apply to the research industry?
I do, actually. Firstly, I think it's important to, I think respect is important. Respecting respondents, of course. We went to a wonderful presentation yesterday that someone from Unilever was giving and talking about brands. It's really, a brand is not a thing, it's the people. And I think it's really important today to look through in our surveys and our work with respondents and research is to include the lens of values, to understand what the values are of the target audience, of consumers, of citizens, and then to see how that might align with the values of the advertiser or the brand. So I think that is something that we came away from this research with, that we are looking through all the time in our work, is to really look for what that alignment is and to really understand the values of this target audience of viewers, consumers, or citizens.
I guess the one thing I would add is to not be afraid to look at similarities as well as differences. Like you can take a broad group like women and then you can break it down into different groups of women, like we did African American women within the US as well as white women. And, each one kind of has a unique narrative and a unique journey in terms of some of the challenges and things that they have to face, as well as, some of the mechanisms that they use to kind of cope with some of the adversity that they have to deal with. So, I think it's okay to look at people, in a broad stroke, but then also kind of break it down and really kind of get into some of the social cultural nuances of what makes different groups tick. And, sometimes people may not want to alienate people, and at the same time, not, kind of generalize people at the same time. But I think there's room for both, even within one study, for example.
Thanks, guys. We've got a comment, not a question, from the audience, but I'll just read that out because I think it's also some really good advice. Another idea is reaching out to your college or university for mentees. I reached out to Smith College and have thusly mentored a number of women over the years who are interested in getting into market research. I connected with the career office and they connected me with the relevant departments such as sociology, data science, etc. So there's another piece of advice. And another question for Kristin. Somebody wants to know what Wire is. So perhaps you could give us a brief description of that.
I would love to. Wire is Women in Research. We are a certified nonprofit based in the U.S., but have a global presence. We've been around, I think last year was our 10-year anniversary, so going on 12 years. in the industry now, and started out originally as primarily a networking group. So we ran local events primarily in the U.S. to begin with, and then over time our community sort of grew. We had women that moved to London and Paris and Sydney, and we started running events in those markets, and then also started expanding our programming and services. So now we run a mentoring program, as I just mentioned. So we match over 100 women in the industry every year with women that have over 10 years of research experience as mentors all around the world. We run events in local markets on pretty much every continent now, as well as at some of the largest industry events, IEX events, SMR. We've got partnerships with all of the big research associations. We run an online mentoring program called Office Hours. So for women that are not engaged with the one-to-one mentoring program, they can log on and connect with a mentor on a monthly basis to get questions answered. We have a partnership with the SMR Foundation where we promote and support a scholarship for a woman in an emerging or conflict market. So we funded 3 scholarships so far, one in Kenya, one in Guatemala, one in Cambodia. We have another scholarship we're going to be working on this year. So I won't belabor all of the programming and services that we offer, but we are an entirely corporate donor supported group. We're volunteer powered. All of our corporate donors support our programming and services. So you can learn more about WIRE and everything that we do at womeninresearch.org.
Oh, Kristin, can you also say something about the 50/50 initiative?
Yes. Annie has been, of course, as I mentioned earlier, has been a big inspiration for, getting more female faces and more diverse faces on stage. And along with the conference tracking that she does, we also run a 50/50 initiative where women can go and sign up. It's completely free. So all of our programming and services are free to our community. It's not a membership-based organization, but you can go to our website. If you are a woman and you want to speak, you can put yourself on the list, put down what your category specialization is, and then anytime a conference says, well, gosh, I don't know any women, or I don't know anyone to ask, we send them a list of a couple hundred to 1,000 women that they can choose from to invite to their conferences to speak. So our 50/50 initiative is all about getting more female faces on stage. Thank you, Annie, for the prompt.
Just a short list of 1,000 female experts.
Just a short list. Yes. I always love it when people say, I don't know any women to ask. Well, let me help you out there. I know a lot of women you can ask to speak.
That is super. I'm just going to track back to a different sort of topic for a moment. And we've been talking about sort of marketing campaigns earlier in Kanika's presentation. But we've all seen some of those efforts in marketing campaigns where, somebody's tried to do something and it's gone badly wrong. And we tend to talk about these, campaigns as being tone deaf. Can you think of any examples in the research world where this has happened? And I'll let people self-select in to answer that one.
I would say that in the in the research world, I think it's not so much it's the tone deafness, I think, when it comes to sampling. I think that especially now that we're looking at the world and the multicultural world and the technology and the empowerment of consumers and of citizens, I think that we really have to pay attention to our sampling. And I think by avoiding that or not being cognizant of sampling and looking at our diversity in our samples, I think that's where we run into problems with tone deafness. So I think that would be my recommendation.
I've also got an example of this within the market industry where we're trying to achieve diversity but not quite failing. So sometimes when you can see a conference doesn't have 50/50 speakers parity, the excuse that you might hear is that we only choose the best speakers, which somehow inherently suggests that men are better speakers than women. But if you've been to a conference, it's pretty clear that there's no such thing as a better gender when it comes to speaking. Men and women are just as skilled as speakers. They're just as expert in their fields. So it's not that they're only choosing the best speakers. Conference organizers need to go beyond that and realize there's more to submissions they get than simply, reading the best. They need to make sure that their requests for submissions are spread broadly, that those requests go to sites where women hang out, where Black people hang out, where people who are disabled hang out. Make sure that when you're looking for speakers, you are looking in diverse places, because clearly what we've been doing historically appeals to men more often. So we need to make sure that what we do in the future appeals to men and women, so that in that sense we'll be much more likely to achieve gender parity on stage.
So Ray here, I'd like to pick up something that Barbara and Andreas did well that I see sometimes people doing badly, which is we'll sometimes see people split the data by male-female, and then we'll split the data by African-American versus white community and so on. And that can forget that within 51% of the population, i.e. the women, there are variations. And you can't group that data together. So I think when we look at data, particularly in areas like auto, was one that you highlighted, Barbara and Andreas, you can't then say, and women want this. That is as bad as ignoring women in many ways. We've got to realize that we've got to keep looking with all of our research tools to make sure we make sense of that.
Thanks, Ray. We are almost out of time. If anybody in the audience has been sitting on a question and you wanted to ask it, please type it in quickly. And while you're thinking about that, I'll just open the floor. Does anyone on the panel like to chip in with anything else before we close out? Anything you've been sitting there busting to mention that hasn't come up in the flow of conversation?
Yeah, so actually I would like to just bring up a point. It's based on Annie's presentation. So when we were looking at the chart where we said there are still conferences where women's participation is less than 30%, I noticed some of the names of the conferences. So it was SMR Big Data Sawtooth Summit. So I know these are some of the more technical presentations or technical forums. So is it that we are saying that in general women do not participate in these such conferences, or is it that you actually have low number of participation from women in the workforce, and therefore the participation in turn in conferences is low?
There are literally thousands of women experts in statistics, data science, analytics, programming, dashboards, all of these technical fields. Women experts exist. The issue is, they have family and home, as you very much recognize in your side of the world. They have these feelings of their skills aren't in the right place, they're not supported at work, and then on top of that, the men who more often than average apply for anything regardless and say yes all the time. So there are numerous things that play into fewer women being on stage. It is not that there are insufficient female experts to have female speakers on stage. So I think conference organizers just need to check their bias at the door and recognize that there are many more places to find speakers in those technical areas if they need them. My personal Twitter account has lists upon lists upon lists of women experts in all of these technical fields. Kristin Luck will send thousands of names if you require them. So these women are here. Ask them to participate.
Yeah, thank you. That's very comforting to know. So that's one hurdle crossed. You do have those skills. It's just that you need to be out there presenting more on.
Yes, say yes. When someone asks, say yes.
And a couple of other things I'll chip in. If somebody asks you, do not then say, but I'll send a male colleague instead.
Oh, that drives me nuts. Sometimes when someone is in a situation like what Ray described, where they have no female speakers on a panel or at the conference, if you are a woman who is being asked, don't say, oh, I'm not good enough, but my male colleague would be good enough. If you yourself cannot participate, consider an expert who is in an underrepresented group. So first consider your female expert colleagues, consider people of color, consider people with disabilities, consider the full range of experts at your company, not just the white people, the white man who always speaks at conferences.
Yeah. And I think the other challenge I'd throw down to people organising conferences who aren't making that target is you don't get to 50-50 representation without actively thinking about it and doing something about it at the planning stage yet. Now, maybe at some point it will happen that does, but you've really got to be starting with that as your goal at the beginning and, making changes, actively seeking people if you're trying to get that 50-50 split.
Absolutely.
Well, I think part of it has to do with, making sure that the board that's organizing the conference is diverse. I mean, Annie pointed out in her presentation earlier, that, SampleCon had a serious diversity issue a few years ago. And now if you look at their board, they have made a real effort. Seema Vasa is the chairman of the board for SampleCon now. They, Dinah Bowen's been very involved, Bonnie Bressler, and they have made a significant impact in diversity at their conferences because they have a more diverse group of people that is seeking out speakers now.
Excellent. I think it's been a really enjoyable discussion. So thank you all very much.